Okay, I think we are ready to begin. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Janet LeClaire. I'm CEO of Memory Movement Charlotte. Warm welcome to everybody in the room and on Zoom. Hopefully everybody can see and hear us. And I just wanted to start by introducing our esteemed hosts tonight. We have Dr. Aris Chaconas is going to be with us tonight, and he is a neurologist with Memory Movement Charlotte. He's been here since 2017, has just decades of experience, although he looks like he's a teenager. So, so he must be getting a lot of good sleep.
Oh, like a bee.
Yes, yes. And equally as vibrant is Shelly Sedory, who's to his right. And Shelly is a nurse and educator, has been with Memory Movement Charlotte since 2016. So both of which have had just tons of experience, not only with our practice, have been instrumental in really creating the practice we have today, but have just really remarkable careers in healthcare.
Yes.
Don't you love a good night's sleep?
Absolutely. I wish I had.
Nothing like a good night's sleep, is there? When you just like tuck in under those covers, you sleep all night, you get up in the morning and you're like, oh, I just slept all night. I feel like a little child.
Unfortunately, I can't remember the last time I had.
I know. Well, maybe you need to have some of our strategies we're talking
Yes,
about
give me
today.
a copy of that.
We might need those, but
Yeah.
yeah.
And I want to be sure that everyone can hear us, because I remember zooming into this room, and I'm going to talk loud, so hopefully people can hear us well.
Can everybody hear Dr. Chaconas?
Yeah. Okay. Well, when I thought about this talk, I looked at some surveys, and it may not surprise you to know that about 2/3 of adults in the developed world complain of inadequate sleep, either inadequate duration of sleep or quality of sleep. So it's an epidemic, and we're all aware that the World Health Organization has pronounced insomnia or poor quality sleep as a World Health problem. And I thought about, when I don't have a good night's sleep, I think we all know the consequences of that the next day, how you might feel. Perhaps we're cranky, tired, can't concentrate as well. Our mood can be depressed. Generally, you know that you didn't sleep well. And so those consequences are pretty familiar to all of us on a personal level. But in studying sleep, we realize the deleterious health consequences of not sleeping, that for a lot of people is surprising, because it may not surprise you, they don't teach too much about sleep in medical school. So sleep specialists are around now who really have studied this and taken fellowships and learned how to record sleep and diagnose sleep problems. So they're very good at talking about, why we sleep, the benefits of it, other than feeling better the next day, and the consequences to our health, our mental health and our physical health. So what Shelly and I thought we would do is talk about what is sleep, why do we sleep, what are some of the rhythms in the brain that are so interesting that all animals have when we sleep, what regulates sleep. There's chemicals that are involved in that, in addition to electrical impulses in the brain. What about sleep medicines? Is sleep medicine, is that a misnomer? And these medicines are really sedatives? We have strong opinions about those medicines. And then what can we do that's not medicine related, the so-called non-pharmacological means of ensuring good sleep, which I know Shelly has counseled countless patients through the years in our clinic on that, and actually authored this handout that we have in the office. I want to certainly be careful of how much I talk, because we have a Q&A or question and answer part. So if I ramble, I know Shelly will. So I thought that I first talk about why sleep evolved. I mean, if you think about evolutionary science, whether you're a creationist with God's creation or evolution, from an evolutionary standpoint, it doesn't make sense that we sleep. And what I mean by that is in nature, as we evolved, as all animals evolved, there are character traits or traits of individual species that select for survival. For example, a very commonly used example is the giraffe. There was this school of thought that giraffes have long necks because through the years they'd stretch to try to eat the leaves higher in the trees because there were no leaves lower. But it's more likely that giraffes survived because they already had long necks by accident. So they were able to get to the food where other animals couldn't, and they didn't survive. So we ask ourselves, well, if we sleep, what advantage for survival does sleep give us? If you're not awake, fully awake, and you're living in the jungle, some animal could eat you. So it doesn't make sense to sleep. And when we're sleeping, we're not gathering food, we're not creating a social environment in our village, we're not procreating, we're not building shelter. So it doesn't quite make sense. So either evolution made a huge mistake because we all sleep and all animals sleep, or the consequences, the negative consequences of sleeping are far outweighed by the benefits, which is that sleep is mandatory for our health, and we've got to do it. And if we're the only species that purposely sleep deprives ourselves, where we'll stay up late to get work done, or we'll take on jobs, shift work that messes up our sleep. But animals don't do that. My rescue dog, Charles, he's like a little child. He's 2 years old. 9 o'clock at night comes, he's zipping to his bed like clockwork. I look at my watch, it's 9. His internal cycle is 9 is bedtime, and he never fails. So he doesn't sleep deprive himself.
You don't get up and work with you?
No, no, he's rather bored by the nights. So let me touch on the health consequences of not sleeping well, because that kind of fits with why we sleep. What are the benefits? We know that the immune system is linked to sleeping well. So fighting infections like from bacteria and viruses, or fighting cancers. Not many of us know that we can form small cancers in our body and never know it, but our immune system surveils our body. It's looking for small cancers, and it can rid us of a little cancer, and we're a cancer survivor without even knowing it. So one night of bad sleep drops your immune system's efficiency by about 70%. So you're vulnerable at that point to cancers forming, not immediately, but with repeated lack of sleep, and you're vulnerable to infections as well. The risk of heart disease and stroke goes up. The risk of diabetes goes up. So these are public health problems that getting a good night's sleep can reduce. I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but daylight savings time, I know a lot of us, as I've gotten older, it's hard for me to adjust to a single hour of a time change. I feel terrible for about 2 weeks. But during daylight savings time, there's a big spike in heart attacks that's linked directly to the disruption of sleep from that 1 hour shift. Starting school so early, where kids have to get the school bus and they're getting up at like 4:35 a.m. A lot of that was done because of working parents who have to get their kids off to school because they have to go to work. But when they go from summer into the school year and they're getting up earlier, that's a risk to their health. Plus, it also impedes their learning of all things. And I know Shelly is going to talk a little bit about the reinforcement of memory. We'll go back and forth on that. But so you can see that there are physical maladies or illnesses that you're more likely to suffer just by not sleeping consistently well, which is usually about 7 to 9 hours a night. You know, it's like a kind of a rough estimate, like 8 hours is really good. Mental health is impacted by that as well. So anxiety, depression, thoughts of suicide go up with poor sleep. The risk of drowsy driving. It's estimated that there's an accident every hour in this country due to drowsy driving. If you've ever kind of nodded off while you're driving and you're grateful that you felt that sense of fear and it woke you up and you rescued yourself, and you know what I'm talking about. There's something else that we may not realize when we're driving drowsy. They're called micro sleeps. You may have heard this term. You're for a split second, you're sound asleep, but you wake up and it keeps happening and you don't even realize it. You think you're awake the whole time. So these micro sleeps figure into the risk of an automobile accident. So if I haven't convinced you yet that there's more consequences to like not sleeping.
I was gonna say, can we have some good news?
Yeah,
about
I'm trying to make this a fun, happy talk. Well, on the bright side.
There is a bright side of sleep.
The converse.
There is a bright side.
Yeah.
I love that.
On the converse, you can reduce your risk of these illnesses just by getting good sleep. There's something fascinating in the world of sleep study. If you've heard of the word circadian rhythm, circa means going around, dian is a derivation of the word day. So there's this rhythm that we've all evolved into that's linked towards sunrise and sunset. So we have a 24-hour day, and most human beings are kind of close to a 24-hour sleep-wake rhythm. It's not exact. There were some scientists who decided it would be a good idea to go into a dark cave together for 3 months. And they timed each other's wakeful and sleep periods because in spite of being in the dark, I mean, total darkness with no sun to tell you it's sunrise or sunset, they fell into a natural sleep-wake rhythm where they slept for maybe about 8 hours and then they were awake the rest of the time. And they all differed in their rhythm. Most people, they're about 25 hours, so it's not a 24-hour clock. The younger you are, the longer your sleep cycle. It could be 28 hours. But that doesn't quite jive with the sun in our rotation or orbit. When we're older, it might be shorter, 23 hours. So you can see that it's very individualized when you should be asleep, how much you should sleep, and how that jives with society. So, you know, I know that our schedule here in the office is terrible for my sleep. I'm not talking about it. We need to change the schedule just for me. What's really fascinating is that it's not just animals that have that rhythm. Plants have it too, which is kind of hard to understand. If you look at a tree, maybe a tree that's against a big building, you notice that the branches are fuller towards where the sun shines the most. That's called phototropism, where over time, slowly, the plant preferentially grows where it gets the sun for its energy. There's something called heliotropism, where a plant actually moves with the sun. And there's some plants where you can see it. The leaves will open and focus towards the sun, like that phototropism. They want to grow that way. But the plant will rotate and follow the sun, called heliotropism. So these scientists took this one plant that has like big leaves and they open up in the sunlight and they can time its movement, measure it. And they put those plants in the darkness and then filmed them with just a little bit of light so it didn't interfere with their response. And they open their leaves and move the same way they would if they were out in the sunlight, but there's no sunlight. So it's built into plants to have this rhythm as well, which I think is incredibly fascinating. So that's sort of genetic inside the cells of the plant, that they swell with fluid, with water to push the plant in the direction that follows the sun. So it's pretty neat that we have this rhythm. But what is linked to the rhythm? So I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but our brain turns on and off, and it has a alerting center in the brain that when it's time to be awake, it wakes up and it stays awake. And then when it's time to be asleep, it stops alerting or arousing the brain, and it lets hormones work to get us into sleep. And Shelly and I were just talking about this. One of the hormones is melatonin, which is touted as a sleep aid, that it helps you sleep, when in fact, and I know Shelly counsels our patients well on this, it doesn't help you sleep. And you think, well, why is it marketed for that? It is a natural hormone, so it's safe. It's made in a little part of the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and it's linked to that circadian rhythm. We liken the melatonin release in the brain to the starter pistol of a race. So if the race is going to sleep, the guy or gal with the pistol who fires it is firing melatonin. It's a signal that, hey, brain, it's time to sleep. But it doesn't make the brain sleep. What comes in is a hormone called adenosine, or as the British call it, adenosine. And the reason I say that, there's this book I could refer you to called Why We Sleep by a British neuroscientist called Matthew Walker. And I was listening to the audiobook on that, and they kept saying adenosine, and I had no idea what that was. Then I read the book, and it's adenosine. So this is a hormone that starts to build in the morning, and it gets up to a level at night where it causes what we call sleep pressure. It pushes you into sleep. So the brain says it's time to sleep, melatonin says go, and adenosine pushes you into sleep. And there are a lot of things that interfere with adenosine, directly blocking it, like caffeine or nicotine. So you're blocking adenosine when you use caffeine or nicotine as a stimulant to stay awake. But adenosine stays high, and when the caffeine wears off, you have that crash because all that adenosine's been waiting to put you to sleep. And the half-life of caffeine, meaning the amount of time it takes for half of it to drop in your bloodstream, is about 5 to 6 hours. So if you've ever had a cup of coffee and you're going real good, and 4 or 5 hours later, you're like reaching for another cup because you're crashing, it's because the adenosine is trying to make you sleep. So if you cram at night to study in college, the caffeine isn't such a great idea, or it doesn't work for long.
I just wanted to comment a couple of things with the melatonin. It's augmenting what's already there. So as the sun starts to go down, is when your melatonin starts to increase. And when we take melatonin, what we're trying to do is augment or kind of accentuate that melatonin that's present. One of the mistakes we see commonly with people that come in and are taking melatonin or want to take it, is they take it at bedtime because they're like, oh, this is a sleeping pill. So if I take it at bedtime, it'll put me to sleep. But it really is something we use at sunset because it augments the melatonin that's already there and then helps us to fall asleep easier. So if you do use melatonin, it's really important to know when to take that medication or that supplement so that you can augment what's there, not, try to get a sleeping pill. So that's a really important thing. Second thing within that regards to the circadian rhythms, it's just kind of a good example of how these work. Adolescents' circadian rhythms are on a different kind of pathway than other people because of their hormones and all their growth that's going on. And so what you'll find is adolescents like to stay up really late, right? So if you remember your adolescent days or have adolescents around you, it's 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, they're up there, studying. Yes, that's what our adolescents do at 2 o'clock in the morning. But they stay awake much later because of the way their circadian rhythms are. And then they want to sleep in longer because that's how their rhythms are. And what does our school system do? The people who go to school the earliest are the high school students who actually should be the ones who go to school later because of what their circadian rhythms are telling them to do. So, societally, we don't really respond to the, natural circadian rhythms and the natural flow of our bodies. Instead, we create systems to make it more difficult. So these poor adolescents who normally are staying up till 1 o'clock in the morning and now being forced to get up at 5:30 so they can get a bus at 6:15 and get to school. Well, geez, no wonder they're doing so well in their first and second and third period classes. Well, they can hardly stay awake because it's really contrary to their own circadian rhythms. So even over our lifespan, our circadian rhythms change and alter over the lifespan.
There's some pressure to get rid of daylight savings time and to start classes later for young people.
I'm from Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania, in fact, and there was a push by one of the school systems there to change the school day so that the high school students would start later and the elementary kids who were up at 6 o'clock in the morning wanting to know why cartoons are not on, starting them earlier. And the reason that the overall school system, WIPIAL, the Western Pennsylvania Inter-Athletic Association, would not do it is because of sports. If we start our high school students later in the day, well, we can't get those sporting events in at the end of the school day. They'd start way too late. And so the general grouping of the schools said no. And so you couldn't have one school district starting their high school kids late and everybody else starting early. So it just never got traction. But it truly would be the best thing for our high school students if we flipped when they start school. Yeah, it's an interesting thing.
One thing I learned recently was another use of melatonin. So, I mean, you can still try melatonin to see if it'll give you the starter pistol to sleep, and it may help some people. And to your point, you got to take it earlier than bedtime, maybe 2, 3, 4 hours earlier. But there was some use or some studies of using melatonin for jet lag. So if you flew from Charlotte to London, it's a 5-hour, 8-hour flight, 5-hour time difference, usually, or depending on what our daily savings time is. So if you're in London and they're going to bed at 10 and your clock is telling you it's 5 Charlotte time, you could take melatonin to sort of fool your circadian rhythm, and it starts to absorb in your system over a few hours, and that gives you the signal that it's time to sleep. It's not fail safe, and you might have to take that for a number of nights to reset yourself, only to turn around and fly back to Charlotte. It messes it all up again.
Yeah, exactly.
But it may have its best use in jet lag. For example.
Yeah. And we do see it as an effective remedy for our patients and some of our caregivers when they say, I'm really just having a hard time sleeping. Oftentimes our first go-to around the other things that we'll talk about as strategies for sleep is using that melatonin early in the evening and just seeing if we can get that circadian rhythm kind of back where it needs to be and kind of in a soft way, getting the sleep cycle back. And I'd say, we're fairly successful with that. Sometimes it's, beyond a melatonin kind of thing, but very often we'll use that first. Dr. Chaconas, you were going to talk about sleep medications as we're on the subject of taking an agent to help us sleep. What can we take? What should we take? What should we not take? What's your opinion on that?
Well, I've been around as a neurologist long enough to remember some of the old medicines like amitriptyline, which is an antidepressant. Some of the newer medicines like Ambien, Sonata, Lunesta, or even Benadryl, you can get over the counter, or these Tylenol PM preparations. So for most of my career, I thought that sleep medicines, whether they're prescription or over the counter, could induce natural sleep. But we know that when you record a person's brain with these medicines, it doesn't. These medicines, they're kind of like alcohol or anesthetics. They turn your brain down. They suppress the cortex of your brain is where all the nerves are in the outer mantle of the brain. They suppress cortical electrical activity, which is very different than the different stages of sleep. So, I mean, there may be situations where they have to be used because, perhaps at nighttime, someone might be agitated or confused or having hallucinations, depending on certain illnesses. And you're trying to hopefully sedate them to calm them, and maybe they'll enter into natural sleep. But these drugs are not known to either promote natural sleep or replicate it. It's a $30 billion annual industry, these medications, whether you're buying them over the counter or prescriptions. They've been associated with a higher risk of illnesses, including death, including in young people. I mean, it's a statistical association. It's not totally been worked out what the mechanism of that is, but it seems to be reliable that it's a direct relationship to the sedating medicine somehow. So when we use them cautiously with specific purpose, but we shouldn't be promoting them that, hey, you're not sleeping well, this will work, which really means the non-pharmacological means of sleeping are of much more paramount importance. It's the so-called sleep hygiene. which I know that you want to.
Yeah, yeah.
This is probably the most important part of our.
I think it's
of our
important, yeah,
talk.
to understand why sleep is so important. And one thing I do want to add that we didn't get to touch on with the positive aspects of sleep. During sleep, there's a point in time where the oxygen consumption in the brain is actually very high. And what's happening during that period of time is the brain is sorting out all of the input from the day. It's like going through your inbox and it's going delete, 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 save, delete, 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 save. And so it's really important to our memory that we have good sleep, because it is a time where we're cleaning out our inbox and we're saving specific things in our brain. So that's a real positive thing with sleep. The other thing, Dr. Chaconas, you were talking about the study with the rats and the replication of an activity. So let's throw that in there too, because this is a really kind of cool thing. That teaches us why it is important in so many positive ways. You know, we talked about the negatives with health implications, but there are a lot of really positive things that are happening in our brain when we sleep as well. Memory being, you know, for us as a memory practice, of course, one of the most important things to us, but we also can learn.
Yeah, this is, I think, a very fascinating study. You know, when you look at athletes who are training and getting better at whether it's football or mixed martial arts or ice skating, their training, their experience in training, if they've been sleep deprived, is universally dissatisfying. They know that they feel like they've wasted their time that day. They know they're not on top of their games, they're not progressing. And that's partly because of how we feel after we haven't slept well. But it turns out, to your point, that during sleep, we're reinforcing skills that we've learned prior to sleeping. And there was a interesting study that was done with mice or rats, where these rats were electrodes were implanted in their brain so that they could record the brain waves, the brain impulses. And they linked those brain impulses through a computer to a sound generator. So as there were different impulses, there were different sound notes, like making music. So while the brain was making impulses, the scientists could hear the sounds like do 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 do, like that. Perfect time. Like that music. So they took these rats and they put them in a maze or a labyrinth. And there was the scent of food at the end of the maze. So they had to learn to run the same maze. And they found that when they slept at night, the impulses, the musical sounds their brain made when they were navigating the maze were replayed and replayed on fast speed while they were asleep. So the beep, beep, beep was beep, 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 all through their parts of their sleep. So their brain was practicing what they had learned in the maze. And the rats that were allowed to sleep successfully re-navigated the maze to get to the food. The rats that were sleep deprived couldn't learn to do it. So sleeping reinforces memory, muscle memory, like for athletes, and learned memory if you're studying. So if you cram at night to take a test, you may spill it all out the next day on the test. You could get an A, but you're not going to remember it and build on your learning. So a lot of students don't build their skills. They just learn to take a test. Sadly.
Yeah. I mean, it's really very fascinating when you start to sleep, because there's a lot of things that are happening when we think our brains are at rest, but there's actually a lot of really positive things for, you know, us and our learning and our memories that happen during that time. So we do want to spend just a few minutes talking about, like, how can we improve our sleep? As we're saying, you know, medications are not, you know, advisable. Melatonin can be helpful, but what can we do to help ourselves sleep? So some of it has to do with what we do during the day, you know. So are we getting some sunlight? Because we need exposure to sunlight in order for us then to have the darkness for our melatonin to kick in. So if we're in a home that doesn't have good lighting and we're not out in the sunshine, it can really affect our ability to fall asleep that evening since we don't have that exposure. Hydration. If you're dehydrated and you go to sleep, you will not sleep as well. Now the caveat on that, you're nodding your head, you recognize that. When you're dehydrated, you just don't sleep as well. Your brain needs water and it needs sugar. And so if we don't have water, it does affect our brain's ability to do what it needs to during the sleep time. So hydrating is really important, with the caveat that we don't want to start hydrating right before we go to bed. You know, because if we start hydrating at 7 o'clock in the evening, you're going to be peeing at 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning. You're not going to be sleeping. So, you know, the hydration has to happen, you know, during the day so that we can then have our brains prepared for sleep at night. So there are those things. Alcohol always comes up as, you know, if I drink a glass of wine, man, I fall asleep so easily, right? Yes, alcohol is sedating. And so if we have a glass of alcohol of any sort, right, dinner time, we may find that we fall asleep very easily. But once that alcohol is metabolized during the night, it actually releases norepinephrine, which is a stimulant. And so what you find is you fall asleep really easily, but you wake up 4 o'clock in the morning and you are awake and you're like, why can't I fall back to sleep? I can't go back to sleep. All those things playing over your mind and you're wide awake. So one of the strategies you can do to improve your sleep is to, you know, discontinue or certainly decrease the amount of alcohol that's ingested in order to improve your sleep. We recommend at least 2 days a week, separated, not two together necessarily, where there is no alcohol, to give your brain that chance to sort of recover, to be able to store memories and do what it needs to do. So it's really important to give your brain a break for that. As Dr. Chaconas already said, caffeine, nicotine, those things are stimulants, and they do affect our ability to get a good night's sleep. Some people swear that they can have caffeine at 4 o'clock in the evening and go to sleep. More power to you. If you can do that, you know, I guess I can't tell you no, but overall, most of the population would find their stimulants, and we really shouldn't do it. Exercise. Some people find that if they exercise, you know, in the evening, they actually relax more. It's that, you know, release of tension from the day because you've exercised and you just feel more relaxed and you'll go to sleep. Other people find if I exercise right before bed, I'm all geared up, I'm ready to go, and I can't go to sleep. So it's one of those things. It's very individualized, and you sort of have to play yourself what works for me and what doesn't. Like I said, if it's for stress, then maybe it's going to be a good thing to exercise later. As we're on the kind of stress thing, sometimes what happens if we've had some bad nights of sleep consecutively, we start to get anxious. So we lay down in our bed and we think, I'm not going to go to sleep. I can't sleep. I haven't slept for days. I can't sleep. And so we start having this track in our brain that we're not going to sleep. So what happens? You don't sleep because you're anxious about sleeping. So some of it is also the messaging that we give our brain that helps us to sleep. So we need to say to ourselves, you know, I didn't have a good night's sleep last night, but I'm tired and I'm going to go ahead and go to sleep tonight. Sometimes that messaging is, you know, all we need to get into sleep. Sometimes we need other things. Someone had taught me a while ago, and I find it to be effective, is to count my breathing. So when I'm inhaling, I go 1, 2, 3, exhale 1, 2, 3, 4, and I do it with every breath. Sometimes it's hard not to be distracted by whatever it is that I'm thinking about, particularly our caregivers that are thinking about all the things they couldn't take care of during the day, and your mind's just going. But sometimes just having a focus on something else will let ourselves get into a sleep pattern. Frequently, we have those situations where we call the nighttime hours the bewitching hours. It's finally quiet. It's dark. You're alone, and all you have are your thoughts. And so what you start thinking about is everything that you're worried about, everything that's a concern, everything you've got to take care of. And of course, that interrupts our sleep. This happened to me with Dr. Edwards, and I are working on a program. And I would lay down in bed and I'd sleep for a few hours, and then I'd wake up and I would start thinking about things for the program. I need to remember to do this. Oh, I got to add that to the content. Oh, I got to tell Dr. Edwards this. And I would be wide awake thinking about all these things, which is not dissimilar to whatever we have on our minds that we're worrying about. And what I started doing is I have a notebook beside my bed. And when I would think of something like that, I'd just write it down and then I'd go to sleep because I didn't have to worry about trying to remember it for the next day. And so sometimes just having a journal beside our bed for those worries and concerns we have, sometimes we problem solve during the night when we have that quiet time. Just keeping a little journal beside our bed, writing it down, can sometimes just allow us to let it go and then get back to sleep. Getting back to sleep is probably sometimes harder than actually getting to sleep. Again, it's, avoiding the alcohol, maintaining a regular schedule of when we go to bed and when we get up. Sometimes that's easier said than done, but if we can maintain some regularity, as Dr. Chaconas was saying, it helps us to get into that circadian rhythm and using the natural things from our body to promote sleep. So we really encourage that kind of thing with our patients and caregivers.
You gave me an idea. When I wake up at night and I got a lot on my mind, things to do, I'm going to write it down and I'm going to give it to my wife.
No.
Done.
Yeah, I like that idea.
I'm already on hot water with her.
Yeah, and just another thing, because someone who wrote it in about this ahead of time, and we do want to comment on is napping. Are naps okay? We love a nap. I love a nap. Everybody loves a nap. It's okay to nap. There's no problem taking a nap. An hour after in the morning if you want to, an hour later in the afternoon. What we don't want to do is nap close to bedtime, because then we're taking away that stimulus to sleep. But an afternoon nap for a half an hour, 45 minutes, even an hour is fine. Again, we don't want a long sleep. We're not talking about going to sleep and, being asleep for 6 or 8 hours, starting in the middle of the afternoon. But an hour can really just kind of take the edge off, reset us, take away some of the things from the day and allow us then to be relaxed for the remainder and get to sleep. So we really do like naps. And the older we get, the more important a nap is. And we never say don't nap. It's a good thing.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
If you
Dr. Chaconas, sometimes I can't find him at like 3 in the afternoon.
there's a room in the cot, and if you would avoid a nap past maybe 2 or 3 in the afternoon, napping on the couch watching TV before bedtime, that's not so good.
No.
One of the rules I try to follow, and I do this really for my dogs because they pant a lot, is the bedroom needs to be cold, dark, and gadget free. And there's proof that your brain to sleep needs to drop like 1 degree Fahrenheit. And if you're in a hot room and your brain is not cooling, it's harder to get into sleep. So if you keep it cool, and interestingly, they did a study where you're in a bodysuit that measures temperature and can control temperature. And they found that if your hands and feet are warm, but your body is cool, that's even better. So if you like wearing socks and gloves to go to bed, I guess that could help. But really keeping it dark. Where I live, there's all this ambient light from the city, and my shade, it's like glows. So that's not really good. It should be like blackout.
Yeah.
So you really need to keep it dark and
then
cool.
speaking about light, one of the things also is blue light emission from our electronics, televisions, iPads, computers. And a lot of people now, the only time you have to sit and maybe scroll through Facebook or check your emails is, 10 o'clock at night, and you have all that blue light emission, and blue light affects that melatonin and our ability to go to sleep. So, for at least an hour before bedtime, we shouldn't be using those kind of things that emit blue light. A lot of people like their Kindle, have their Kindle instead of a book and lay down in bed and read. That's fine. You can actually have a setting on those electronic equipment to eliminate the blue light. And so you can still use your Kindle. You've just got to use it the right way in order to reduce the blue light.
I think a lot of sleep specialists preach, like, of all these things, maybe the most important thing is a regular time to go to bed, regular time to wake up. And some people will advise, some doctors would advise you set an alarm clock to go to sleep, not just to wake up. And you should carry that through the weekend as much as is practical, although a lot of us want to sleep later. But it's very hard for the brain to readjust to changes in your sleep-wake cycle, even one night of the difference. So if you want to take advantage of all these sort of wholesome, non-medicine ways of restoring sleep, that handout is great. We got the handout here. And then what we didn't take any time to do, because I know with the Q&A, we didn't talk about individual sleep disorders like insomnia, like sleep onset or sleep maintenance insomnia, sleep apnea, sleepwalking, sleep eating, sleep dressing. There's all kinds of sleep things that happen. Various conditions, like there's movement disorders, like some people act out their dreams. And they hit their spouse or fling themselves out of bed. And that can be disrupting to their sleep as well. Or limb movements that occur in sleep, like periodic limb movements of sleep that can be like bicycling movements, restless leg syndrome, all these things that interrupt your sleep in a physical way, kind of arouse you from sleep just by movements. So those things are diagnosed not just by history, it's often maybe the spouse who observes these things. But by going into a sleep center, you might have to sleep overnight. Some of you may have had that, particularly if you have to wear the mask that gives you pressured air to keep you breathing properly. But those are all important things to look for, disordered breathing in particular.
And that just also means when you come to an appointment, if you've observed any of those things personally or in your spouse, family member, really important to bring to the awareness of the physician. You may not know what it means because they're jerking their leg at night, but Dr. Chaconas does, we do. And so it may seem so incidental to you, like, oh, they're jerking their leg all night, but to us, that can be very significant. So anytime there's anything with sleep that's, out of quote the norm, telling us about it really helps us to help you. Yeah, for sure.
Good. Well, this was terrific. We do have a few questions from our audience. From Mark, how many hours are considered too many hours of sleep?
It's a bit debatable because our sleep requirement can change with life. As we said earlier, what seems to be a healthy minimum is 7 to 9 hours. There are consequences to some people with more sleep. Some people get headaches. I think one of the questions was about, can you get headaches from sleeping too long? Particularly migraines. There's some people that it triggers migraines to sleep too much or too little. By too much, it's whatever it takes to trigger the headaches. There may be some evidence that if we sleep too much, maybe over 10 hours, it can add to hardening the arteries. I'm not sure how much reliable data there is in that. So, generally speaking, for a healthy life, it's like 7 to 9 hours. If someone's sleeping inordinately long, that should be evaluated. Sometimes it's a mood disorder like
So that's
depression.
exactly thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes it's not necessarily that they're sleeping, but they're laying in bed. Don't want to get up, don't have energy, have that apathy. I don't really care to get up because there's nothing for me to do today, or I don't want to deal with my life or whatever. So sometimes when we see someone saying, I'm sleeping all the time, there's a little bit more conversation we have. Is it actually sleeping all the time, or is it you just don't want to get up? Which, is two different things.
Good, for sure. Well, I know we talked about the napping. A lot of folks, I was always a big fan of power napping. 15, 20 minutes is terrific. But just to be, just kind of close the loop on this question, what is the optimum minimum and max? So I know we talked about 1 hour, 2 hour, but if you were to say, hey, this is probably the best range, just like you did 7 to 9 in terms of optimal sleep.
Yeah, that's a question I'm not sure I have an answer for data. It's more not to nap past a certain time because of the interference with nocturnal sleep.
Right.
And some of it is experimental, right? Where I slept for an hour and now I can't get to sleep tonight. So, that's too much sleep. Or I slept for an hour and I'm still so tired and I couldn't stay awake till 9 o'clock. Maybe I need a 2-hour nap. So, and some of it changes just day to day, right? What's going on, how hydrated we are, we've been outside, how much our stress is. So, it's hard to give a definitive answer saying this is the amount, but certainly the more someone's sleeping during the day, the more likelihood we have of having sleep problems at night. And so it's really it's individualized to enough that we couldn't say it's 30 minutes or it's 60 minutes. What we would say is, how is it impacting you day to day? And if it's causing you to be so drowsy at night, you can't even stay up till 9, well, then I'd say you need a little longer nap. If it's, I'm wide awake at 11 o'clock at night because I slept too long with my nap, then you need to cut it back. So there is a little bit of, trial and error with napping.
To your point, the question of why we're napping, we can accumulate a sleep debt if we're not sleeping adequately or soundly. for long enough at night. So these catch-up naps can be helpful. They don't completely let you off the hook, or the consequences of the night before, they don't kind of fix that. So when that's happening, you know that you need to get on a proper sleep hygiene,
Plan.
thank you. You need sleep
He needs more sleep.
so that you can start to recover long-lasting normal sleep.
And we're all we all have it. I mean, it's just epidemic, right? We're all gonna have times we don't sleep as well. What we're trying to say is there's things we can do to try to help ourselves have more good night than less, right? Because there's no way we're gonna all have good night's sleep every night. There's so many variables that come into play. What we're trying to do is mitigate those risks to poor sleep and give ourselves a fighting chance to have a good night's sleep regularly.
We spend 1/3 of our lives asleep, so we better make it worth right. Otherwise, we're wasting our time.
Right, no, absolutely. I know you touched on melatonin and, sleep aids, if you will, but one question specifically around the use of CBD oil for sleep. I don't know if you wanted to touch on that, since that's often promoted as a sleep.
So Shelly and I have had a lot of discussion about CBD and the different forms. So these are called cannabinoids. Tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC, is the active ingredient in marijuana that makes you high. These cannabinoids from hemp generally don't, although there's some new exceptions with this delta-8 and delta-9, particularly if you ignite or heat that chemical. Like a hemp plant flower may have no THC in it, so it's like legal to make rope, but you don't necessarily sell it to make money because you're a drug dealer. But if you heat that, either baking it or igniting it like a cigarette, it can convert into THC. So there's some CBD gummies that you got to be careful with, because they might be the delta-8 or delta-9 derivative of that. It has a psychoactive effect on the brain. The research that's been done with CBD has been mostly around pain, and I know you're a believer in that for pain, from your athletic things. Maybe I'm telling them too much information about it.
That's all right. I'm a CBD. Yeah, topical CBD for pain works really well. I've had a lot of personal experience, and a lot of people I've recommended to, both in the practice and in my personal life, and they swear by it. My uncle had really bad arthritis in his ankle. Nothing was working. I sent him a CBD topical, and he started using it. He's like, oh my gosh, my ankle doesn't hurt anymore. But it's also very individualized. Some people have more receptors in different places, whatever. So it can work. And so I certainly always use it as a possibility. But I do have a dealer, if you will, because she only grows hemp hydroponically, and she hand waters and gives nutrients to the plants in a warehouse. A lot of the hemp plants are in reclaimed tobacco fields, in places that have a lot of insecticides and pesticides. So if anything I put in my body, and I know you're the same way, I want to know where it came from, what's in it. And so if you are using a CBD project, I highly recommend where that hemp came from and where it's being produced. There's a lot of people with the pop-up shops that have, CBD products, but you don't know where that came from. So, just be mindful of that when you use it. And ingestibles being different than topicals certainly as well. But regardless, I think it's important to not have, insecticides and pesticides and something I'm putting on or in my body. But it does work really well for pain. I think when people use it for sleep, and you probably correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of times people use CBD also for anxiety. And anxiety has a role in keeping us awake and stimulating. So I think when people are using CBD for sleep, it's actually trying to curb their anxiety, which then allows them to sleep. Because I haven't really seen things take CBD to sleep, but I have seen a lot take CBD for anxiety, which then would sleep.
That's true, because it's been studied in anxiety, depression, pain, and the prevention of seizures, of epilepsy, and it's found benefit in all of those. But I'd probably look at CBD similar to prescription sleep pills, which are really sedatives. And from what we know, it also doesn't sort of generate or restore
Mhm.
normal sleep.
Yeah.
But to your point, it helps relax you, and you can drift into sleep all the better.
Okay, great. What do you, think about taking Tylenol PM every night for a period of time, just to kind of deal with, a difficult period in your life?
But the diphenhydramine, the Benadryl and Tylenol PM, that's the common over-the-counter sedative. Because not only you use it for allergic reactions and itching and things like that, but it's in that sedative class. And there's some debate as to whether or not chronic use of drugs like that could start to impair a person cognitively. So why take the chance? If the person asking that question is taking it because it's relaxing and helping them cope with a particular difficult time, and maybe they're having sleep deprivation, then they're kind of using it to sedate themselves. So we're self-medicating, just like drinking alcohol. So it'd be good to talk to one's physician if you're requiring that at that time.
Yeah.
Good.
And you're right, there are those short-term, there's a crisis going on and, you have to get some sleep. If you use it for 3 days, it's not going to have any long-term effects. We're talking about, routine use of these over-the-counter medications. We just don't advise it.
Yeah. Okay. One of the things you mentioned that probably a lot of people do, I've done it myself, is the classic falling asleep, right? While watching TV before bed. So the question is, how do you stop this? What's the kind of drill, the behavioral shift, I guess, other than don't get on that couch in the first place?
Maybe you need to exercise for your stress. I don't know.
It's probably good to start with that it's imprinted in your mind, my regular locked in sleep period. So, 10 p.m. till maybe 7 or something like that. Yeah. And to not encroach on that. Because I think what happens in my family, particularly if we're binge watching some series, that happens a lot. And you wake up, you look at your watch, it's like, oh my gosh, it's 11:30. And Janet's going to scream at me if I'm late.
I'm getting a bad rap here.
You are getting a bad rap.
But
yeah, Dr. Chaconas makes a good point, though. The best way for us not to sleep when we're not really wanting to sleep or sleeping too early is to get on that sleep-wake cycle that's routine every day. And the other thing is alcohol, because oftentimes someone has a drink of wine and then, they clean up the dishes and then they sit down on the couch and wine's sedating. And so you might be able to see a half hour or something. And then next thing you know, you're this. And then you wake up or your spouse wakes you up and, hits you and says, time to go to bed. And you go to bed and you're like, wide awake. Because you've had that sort of interim sleep period induced by wine. So, again, it's looking at the things we're doing around the sleep issue and seeing what we can impact to make ourselves sleep better. And that's where, all these sleep hygiene things come into play. The best being routine. And then along with the routine, what other things am I doing to set myself up for failure? Have I not hydrated all day? I'm dry as a bone. I'm not going to sleep well. So, it's that self-assessment on all the things we've talked about to know how we can not fall asleep at 9 o'clock watching a TV show. The other thing would be watch a TV show that's more interesting.
It's a little scary.
Yeah.
There might be a question, I think, because I saw the email, maybe there wasn't. Taking a hot bath at night, if you're having trouble going to sleep or chronically and you want to sort of time a bath, it's not that the heat is really relaxing you, it's the cooling off that after a hot bath allows your body. It sort of sets the stage for going to sleep. So as you're cooling off, you get into bed as long as you're dry and comfortable, cozy. It can aid you into falling asleep. So that's one kind of technique I wanted to throw out there. It could work for some people.
What about if you wake up in the middle of the night sweating over and over? I mean, sweating.
I know, we deal with that a lot in our practice. Night sweats can be from very benign reasons, sometimes not explicable, but sometimes very common prescription drugs. sometimes night sweats, not to alarm you, but night sweats can be a sign of some serious illnesses like certain cancers, but that there are more to it than just sweating, you would know. But like commonly prescribed serotonin medicines like Prozac, Lexapro, Zoloft, these serotonin drugs can lead to that. And some chemotherapy drugs can do that. So we kind of first look at the medications to see.
I think another thing is, when we go to bed, it's cool in the room, get under those really cozy blankets and we have our melatonin and our adenosine push and we go to sleep and we're under all these blankets. And then at like 3 o'clock in the morning, you wake up and you're sweating because you put all those blankets on. It feels good when you get into the bed, but 3 o'clock in the morning when, you recognize I have too many blankets on. So sometimes it's a matter of changing the environment, right? So that we can sleep better. I've done that myself because I love a big, thick, heavy blanket. And then I wake up and I'm like, oh, why did I do that to myself? I'm soaking wet and it's 3 o'clock in the morning.
Remember the dark bedroom, cold bedroom, the cool bedroom, and a gadget-free bedroom.
What about trazodone?
Well, yes.
Describe trazodone.
Yeah, again, I mean, it's trazodone, you may have heard, also called Deseril. It's an old antidepressant, anti-anxiety drug that is still prescribed and works very well for a lot of people for depression and anxiety. It's commonly prescribed to help people initiate sleep at night. But it does fall into that category of it's not going to give you natural sleep, but it may help you through relaxation eventually fall asleep. I think it's a pretty safe drug. It's also another one of the serotonin drugs. Some people aspire on it.
I would say of all the medications we would use for sleep, trazodone's number one. We'll do the melatonin and that's not effective. We'll start with a very low dose of trazodone. Again, it just kind of takes the edge off and just kind of like gets you enough so that you can then fall asleep. And so I would say of any medication we'd use, it would be that one for sleep.
Nothing was really discussed about diet, like not great eating late at night, maybe not eating breakfast, but eating bigger lunches and bigger dinners. I feel like if I ate a big dinner around 7:30, 8 o'clock, it's like your body hasn't even had a chance to even like digest any of that energy. So that tends to like keep me awake.
Yeah, you're absolutely
right. Or versus to if you just didn't start the day with a really nutritious meal or a balanced meal, you kind of just go through the rest of the day eating crap.
Right. Right. All that sugar.
And then sugar, and you go for things that obviously aren't nutritious enough to sustain energy and protein and everything else.
Exactly
So
right.
I feel like sometimes people just eat poorly, and then a lot of times their sleep is deprived for that.
That's right.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And late night eating, one of the problems too is you lay down, then all that pressure from your stomach is on the sphincters in your esophagus, and you get reflux. And so that people start having reflux. And sometimes reflux is the heartburn, but sometimes it's frequent clearing of your throat and coughing. That could be a sign of reflux as well. So late night, big meals, you're exactly right, affects sleep, but also affects our esophagus.
Are there any statistics to support, your true 3 balanced meals per day, maybe not eating after 7 o'clock to kind of enhance a better sleep?
Yeah, it's National Institutes of Health and the Sleep Foundation has this good sleep hygiene. And one of the things they talk about is avoiding eating late, big meals, a lot of liquids for a variety of reasons. But it's still important, to your point, to have complex carbohydrates, protein. You want to maintain blood sugar because, if you're going to sleep and your blood sugar is dropping, that's not good either. That's the fuel for our brain. And sleep is a very active time, even though we're not particularly conscious. But yes, so it's a general nutritional guidelines that we should all follow for health reasons, and then the timing of eating.
For sure.
But not specifically, I know people talk about, it's Thanksgiving, we're all sleeping on the couch after we ate all that sugar because it's high in tryptophan. It's probably not necessarily that. It's like a shift in blood glucose and some other things, but generally just adhere to a good healthy diet and don't eat the meat.
And we certainly promote the Mediterranean diet. That's like, the heart healthy, brain healthy diet. We have information on our website on that. We've done a podcast on not a podcast, a Take Charge Live on Mediterranean diet and nutrition. So we're very big advocates of that, no need for sugar and high fructose corn syrup and processed foods. I mean, all those things impact us in a lot of ways, not just our sleep. So we definitely promote, healthy diets for our good health.
Good, great. Well, one more question is just really kind of a repeat of the melatonin to avoid jet lag. You just give the highlights of that.
Yeah, so don't count on melatonin to put you to sleep, but melatonin can trigger your brain to get ready to sleep. And because the sleep-wake cycle is so turned around with jet lag, particularly, with rapid travel now, if you took a sailboat over to London, you probably would adapt slowly. But with rapid travel, you're thrown into a completely different circadian rhythm. So if you took melatonin about 4 hours before the time you want to go to sleep in London, for example, and kept doing that for the time you're in that time zone, that could help shorten jet lag and restore better sleep. So it's, and that was my question on what do you do if you wake up too soon?
Yep. And how do you get back to sleep?
Because that's something I battle a lot. So I'm looking into that problem. So if you are lying in bed, and this probably is on the front end of sleeping too, if you can't get to sleep or you wake up prematurely, and if it's taking you more than 15 or 20 minutes to nod off, you should get up. You shouldn't sit there and ruminate on that.
Have you ever done that?
Oh, yes, all the time.
Do you really?
Yeah,
Do you get up at night whenever
no,
you
I
can't sleep?
won't get up. That's the problem.
I won't either.
Yeah, I don't
There's
wanna
something
get
about
up.
laying in bed and I'm laying there and I'm awake and I think, if I lay here long enough, I'll fall asleep. You know what I mean? And plus, I don't like to get up into a cold room. I'm not a fan of that. And so
No, it takes some.
it's hard to do that. Does anyone here do that? Get up in the middle of the night, take 15 minutes and do something and go back to bed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've read.
Really?
I've got to read. I've actually done.
Does it work? Does it work?
Quiet.
Yeah, it isn't like 15 minutes, so it's usually an hour or so.
Yeah.
So.
I would start doing something, it would be 3 hours later.
Yeah.
And I'd be like,
Well,
oh,
that's
I guess I'm not getting any sleep
That's what
tonight.
happens, and
Yeah.
sometimes you have an opportunity to catch up.
Yeah, right, exactly. So
You don't want
I
to
can't
turn
say
on.
I can work.
You don't want to get up and exercise or turn on all the lights or go
Yeah,
to the
no.
computer. It might be some soft music, some maybe a little artwork, a little light reading by candlelight or something.
Never gonna work for me.
Yeah.
It's a good thought. I've never met someone who, maybe Janet now, practically says, when I can't sleep for 15 minutes, I get up and do something and go back to bed. I just think that's really hard to do. But if you want to try it, and you feel like you're up for it and game for it, you can see if it works for you.
Good. Well, this has been absolutely terrific. We're way past the end of our time. It's gone so quickly and everybody stayed awake. So I think you guys did a really good job.
More importantly, I hope everyone falls asleep well tonight.
Yeah. We'll have to do a post podcast survey just to see how everybody did. But I want to thank everybody who joined us today in person as well as virtually, and thank our wonderful speakers and educators. It was really, really terrific.